Hello again, I'm John Shrader, and welcome to the Soccer Media Podcast, our weekly look inside the soccer media business and the business of soccer at home and around the world. On today's program, we have an interview with JP Dellacamera, who in 2026 will broadcast his 18th World Cup. Only one World Cup cycle since he first broadcast in 1986 has he not broadcast the World Cup. That is for the men and the women. And it was before the 1990 World Cup that JP called one of the biggest matches ever, the 1989 qualifier at Trinidad and Tobago, a Paul Caligiuri goal. Well, it made a whole lot of difference.
First of all, John, at that time, no one would have thought that decades later, we're going to be talking about that game, but that was a game that started it all. And later, I dubbed it the billion-dollar goal because you think of everything that happened after he scored. Where would we have been had we not qualified for 1990? That gave us momentum for 94. It helped to jumpstart MLS. And since then, USL, NWSL, indoor soccer, you name it, Caligiuri's goal started it.
The full conversation with JP Dellacamera coming up in just minutes. Before we get to that, though, let's hear what Mike Woitala has to say with this week's trivia question.
JP Dellacamera famously made the play-by-play call when Paul Caligiuri scored the 1989 goal to beat Trinidad and Tobago in Port of Spain to qualify the U.S. for the World Cup for the first time in 40 years. It was the 11th goal the USA scored in its 10 qualifying games for the 90 World Cup that would be played in Italy. Can you name the two players who tied for leading the USA in scoring during that qualifying campaign? Your clue is that neither ended up on Coach Bob Gansler's 90 World Cup roster. Stay tuned for the answer later in the show.
All right, Mike will be with us live on tape in just a couple of minutes. Did you know your Soccer America membership includes a daily soccer television schedule delivered to your box every morning? It's something I've been focusing on. I've been relying on for years, maybe even decades, to keep track of games from all corners of the world. For a 30-day free trial of Soccer America, including all its e-letters, go to www.socceramerica.com/free trial. That's socceramerica.com/free trial. We are now joined, as always, by executive editor Mike Woitala from Soccer America. And as we sort of talk with JP about World Cups and all the World Cups he's done and qualifying, we're sort of reminded, Mike, that this American team doesn't have to qualify for next year's World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. It's a wonderful thing to host a World Cup, and it's a wonderful thing to know that you're guaranteed to play in one. But it does take away a really crucial part of the preparations because the qualifying games, they give you, high pressure tests for the players that you're trying to figure out if they can handle a World Cup. So, what Maurizio Pochettino has to do is put a lot of value on what they're doing with their clubs in addition with what they're doing with when they come in for friendly games. But right now he's really looking at how they play week to week, whether it's in Europe, which would be for majority of the players, and what they're doing in MLS.
You guys keep track of that, and you keep track of it very closely at Soccer America. How's it going for some of these players?
Well, it's been mixed. In MLS, you had a situation where a couple of very promising young players, Diego Luna with Real Salt Lake and Alex Freeman with Orlando, they got eliminated in the wild card game. So they're not going to have club action, until they get into the preseason. So that's not a good thing. When it comes to the players abroad, you had a handful of players that are doing really, really well. Christian Pulisic was probably the best player, one of the best players, if not the best player in Serie A, but he's injured right now. Johnny Cardoso has been injured with Atletico Madrid, although he's recovering. Anthony Robinson, that's a concern. He's got a knock again. He was unable to play recently. Malik Tillman, who was settling in at Bayer Leverkusen, he moved there from PSV, and they were really happy with how he was doing, and he's been sidelined. Tim Weah, who earlier had scored against Real Madrid in the Champions League, he got his first French League One assist, but he had to be subbed in the 55th minute of that game, and with an injury, So James Sands, who's at St. Pauli, started 7 straight Bundesliga games, and he had to sit out. So the good news is that it doesn't really matter so much now how fit they are. It matters how fit they are in the summer, and it does open up a situation for Pochettino to test his depth if some of these guys aren't available for upcoming friendlies. So it could be a blessing in disguise in the sense that he can give other players a look, and that it's better to have an injury now than closer to the World Cup.
Normally, under a regular World Cup cycle, the media coverage might be a little different. How does not qualifying or not having to qualify for a World Cup affect the way the media covers this team right now?
Well, probably the biggest difference is that you're talking about, they're all home games, so you don't have the travel that you would have during qualifying, where you go to Latin America and the Caribbean. And with JP on the show, I remember seeing him down there. One of the most interesting trips that I think probably both of us ever took was when the U.S. played Cuba in qualifying for the 2010 World Cup. And, what a fascinating place to go. You can't travel there unless you have a journalism visa or a different type of special visa to go there. And, I remember hanging out with JP at the Hotel Nacional, where all kinds of famous things happened, like the, Lucky Luciano Mayo Lansky meetings that were in one of the Godfather movies. And, at that time, Fidel Castro was still still ran that country. And, before, I remember trying to do research on what they were talking about the game in Cuba. And there's a famous newspaper there called Grandma. And they were reporting about how big a deal it was that the U.S. was going to play in Cuba. And it mentioned that Fidel Castro was quite a good soccer player. And we went to the U.S. practice before the game. And one of the things I'll never forget is that they were mowing the lawn. There was one person mowing the lawn with a push mower, the kind you would use for your own front lawn. And then we had the press officer come from the Cuban team and for a press conference. And, I asked him if he could tell us some more about Fidel Castro's soccer career. And he was obviously Castro fatigued, because he said, "Oh yeah, he was great at soccer. He was great at baseball. He was great at basketball. He was great at tennis and everything." So it was just a fascinating place to go. And it was a tough game. The U.S. won 1-0. They went on to qualify. They beat Cuba, I think it was 5 or 6-1 when they played them at home. But those kind of trips were, you play teams that might not be very high ranked in the world, but when you play them on, in their country, that game is so important, and the fans are so into it, and everybody, the players are so psyched up to play against the U.S. that those are really serious tests to have before a World Cup. And that part is missing. The good thing is that for these upcoming friendly games, and the ones that we've had recently, have been for other teams that have qualified for the World Cup. So, that's a good thing. And the good thing is that a lot of the U.S. players are playing in Europe. Hopefully they'll all be healthy soon. And, those are strong tests too, to get ready for the World Cup.
All right. Well, we didn't talk about Cuba with JP, but we did talk about that massive 1989 game. So we're going to hear from him on that. And I know you and JP have known each other for, I don't want to date you, Mike, but probably somewhere in the several decades, right?
JP's terrific. He's one of these play-by-play guys, the way you were, that knows that we want to hear who the players are when they're playing, and just hitting the right, just the right rhythm of it. And I really look forward to see what JP has to say today.
Well, thanks. We'll get right to it then, Mike. We'll see you next time.
Looking forward to it.
All right. JP Dellacamera, as promised, is coming up. Well, I don't know who keeps track of these things, but I am certain that nobody has broadcast more games on television in the United States of America in soccer than JP Dellacamera. I don't know. Do you keep track of that, JP? But I'm gonna go with that.
No, it's in the thousands, but how many, I have no idea. And there's no real way to track it. I have calendars, the ones that we used to write in that go back to probably, somewhere 1995 maybe. But, sometimes when you missed a game or they changed an assignment, you forgot to cross it out. So I really have no idea.
When was the first? Because you're a hockey guy, right?
Yeah.
You're a hockey guy. What was the first time you broadcast a soccer match on television?
I'm going back, John, to maybe 1980 or so. I filled in on a North American Soccer League game, talked my way into it. I had no real experience, but they hired me. It was WJR in Detroit. I want to say it was 2 games that I did. Trevor Francis actually was on that Detroit Express team back then. I think that was my first real one of that stature. I did some games in the old American Soccer League, Pennsylvania Stoners, when they won a title. I want to say that was maybe 1980. But my first big one, I would say, 85. I did a college soccer on ESPN. That was probably my breakthrough on a national basis.
You talked your way into doing soccer. I did the same. I know how I did it. How did you say I can do this? No problem.
I'm trying to remember how much experience I actually had, but it was very little, because back in that time, nobody really had that experience. But I saw that the Detroit Express were going to be doing radio and television, and that first couple of games, their guy couldn't do it. I think he was on the TV side maybe. So I called the program director. They really had nobody. I think that's how I got it. Told them my experience, which was very little at that time, and they gave me a shot at it. So I think can't remember which game was which. I did a game in Tulsa, and I did a game in Fort Lauderdale at what was then the old Lockhart Stadium.
Are we talking about the Rough Riders and the Strikers? What were the names?
Also Roughnecks, and
No.
they were the Strikers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that goes back a ways. So there's a few people who remember probably the Pennsylvania Stoners, but frankly, that's the first time I've heard of the late great Pennsylvania Stoners. Well, let me be Captain Obvious here, JP. The business has changed a little bit, has it not, since 1980?
Well, it's totally different, since the 80s and even 1990. I did the first World Cup in 1986, and that was off the monitor in Canada. The games were in Mexico. We had the CBC studios. It was myself, Shep Messing, Seamus Mallon. It was 3 in the booth off the monitor. And that was my first World Cup experience. But my first World Cup experience live was 1990 in Italy. Turner had the games then. And ever since then, pretty much all of the World Cups we've done have been on site. So take it from 1990, big difference in terms of the number of games that we even did. I want to say, John, I tried to Google it this morning and I couldn't even get the right answer. But I think it was in the 20s. Out of maybe 52 games, we did maybe in the 20s. And I think ABC had a handful of games at that time. So after that, 1994 World Cup was the very first time that, in the US anyway, all games, every single game was broadcast.
And this is going to be in 2026, World Cup number 18 for you, broadcasting. So you've done every World Cup since 1986?
On the men's side, yes. On the women's side, the only one I missed was 2011. So I think everybody's excited about this one, though, because first of all, it's in our country. It's the biggest World Cup that's ever been. We just saw the announcement that Fox put out where 69 games are going to be on what we say Big Fox or the Fox Broadcasting Network. That's up from 34 that they did in Qatar, 35 games on FS1. And Fox has had the biggest events in the world. This is bigger than any Super Bowl. You and I know this. NFL fans don't know this, but we know this. It's the biggest event on the planet. Fox will blow it out of the water, just like ESPN did when they had their last World Cup. They're not saying this is it for now, and we'll just treat it like, we're not going to do any the next time, so we'll do it halfway. They'll never do that at Fox or at ESPN for that matter. So I would expect that not only the games will be the best we've ever seen, but also the shoulder programming around it, all of the things that Fox will do in their own Fox way to make this an even bigger event. If that's possible, they will do it.
It will be the biggest, grandest, most lucrative, most attended, most watched event. I'm going to be hyperbolic here, but true, in the history of sports in the world.
Without
period.
a doubt. If you go back to 1994, I was doing it on radio then, but the 1994 World Cup generated the most in everything, whether it was TV ratings at that time, whether it was sponsorship, ticket sales. There were no empty seats at those stadiums. I was in Italy for the final. I saw empty seats around me, which really stunned me. But we have no social media, by the way, really, in 1994. Not really, not compared to now. So social media on its own will drive this thing to record levels.
Yeah, and larger field, 48 teams, 3 different countries.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
one
grand.
to
Now,
remember, right? It's one to remember.
yeah.
Just for that, the fact that it's, whether you agree with it or not, that it's biggest ever, but to have 3 countries and the 3 countries that we're talking about, USA, Mexico, and Canada. I mean, that's huge when you think about the undertaking that Fox has to do here.
Oh my.
How many studio teams will there be? I don't know. How many sets will there be? I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it could be, a one size fits all when you're dealing with 3 countries.
Well, and you also have English, and in Canada you'll do it in Spanish, and in the U.S. I'm sorry, in French as well. The U.S. you'll do it in Spanish as well. Not to mention beaming it to every other country in the world. We know that Netflix has the next couple of women's World Cups. Unless I missed something, and I'll be embarrassed if I did. The 2030 television deal has not been announced yet, correct?
Correct. I don't know where they are in the bidding stage, whether it's been open for X amount of time. I have no idea of that, but I think a lot of people are surprised at that because people have asked me that, like, who has it? And I had to think before because, I mean, nobody has it, So I'm guessing that they're going to bundle it, maybe 2 at a time, maybe 3. I'm not sure. But all we know is that Netflix has the next 2 women's World Cups, and I would imagine that Netflix would be interested in the men also. I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of bidders out there. What I wondered, John, because you and I have talked about this off air about linear television. If does Netflix take this and it's just on Netflix, or is it in their contract where they can put some games on linear? And how that shapes up, to me, and how successful Netflix is will probably mean that others like an Apple, I don't want to speak for Apple, obviously, or Google or Amazon, but is this the future with Netflix starting the Women's World Cup?
Yeah. And I guess if he would be willing to share that with us, we could ask our friend Michael Cohen, who's involved with that, but I'm pretty sure he wouldn't tell us if he knows, he knows. And
I think it's going to be a secret, for a little bit anyway. But I know that, when they hired Michael, obviously, and Matt Leach, who I know from ESPN, that told me how serious they are about it. And there's other people there that I'm not as familiar with, but I know their background, their resume. I think they'll do it absolutely in the right way.
Yeah, and this is a game that Americans love increasingly, and Americans increasingly expect very high quality television production, high quality announcers. Could you have imagined when you first did that World Cup on a monitor in from Mexico City in 1986? That here we would be 40 years later looking at the game like this in America?
No, there's no chance. It's the same way if you had said when Major League Soccer started in 1996, could anyone had envisioned this many teams, this kind of attendance, all of these stadiums, academies, David Beckham coming over here, Lionel Messi coming over here, like nobody would have. The best crystal ball couldn't have predicted any of this.
Do you have a sense of what the rest of the world thinks about American soccer at this point? Because as we know, they were quite skeptical for a long time. Are they still, do you think, as skeptical as they once were?
There's still probably the Ted Lasso stuff, that's
Yeah.
out there where they make fun of Americans. But I think that when you see the number of people that have come over here to play in MLS, I mean, just think about it. We said that David Beckham was a game changer when he first came over. Then later, others came like a Thierry Henry and a Robbie Keane and so many others that you forget all of the names that came over. And now you get Lionel Messi here. You get the biggest name in soccer coming over here to play, and he's not going to come over here to play if he didn't think it was serious. So I think that the image has changed in a more positive way. We're seeing transfers going both ways now. We are selling players over there. They are continuing to sell players over here. Son coming over here to play for LAFC, another game changer. Just the recognition, the merchandise, the ratings, all of that stuff. He's already paid his own way here. So I think the image has been changing over the years with each big signing, with each big move that MLS makes. And I think now we're in a very good place.
Yeah. The 1986 World Cup was one in which the U.S. didn't play. They hadn't played in a World Cup in 40 years, from 1950 to 1990. But your voice is attached to one of the great moments in American men's soccer, and that was a qualifying match in which the U.S. won. Caligiuri scored, I believe, on a goal in 1989. What are your sort of memories and thoughts of that place in American soccer, and maybe in your life and career?
First of all, John, at that time, no one would have thought that decades later, we're going to be talking about that game, but that was a game that started it all. And later, I dubbed it the $1 billion goal, because you think of everything that happened after he scored. Where would we have been had we not qualified for 1990? That gave us momentum for 94. It helped to jumpstart MLS. And since then, USL, NWSL, indoor soccer, you name it, Caligiuri's goal started it. But I remember more about that event than I do about the game itself. I remember, going down there on the flight with the team. And back then, fans could show up at the airport, at the gate. It was friendly, but it was pretty intimidating with all the Trinidad fans that were there. They were expecting to go to the World Cup. They were expecting to qualify, and the U.S. stood in their way. And I can remember going through the streets of Trinidad the day before and seeing people had painted their cars red, their houses red. I remember going to the stadium at least 5 hours before kick, because I was told that if I didn't go 5 hours before it, I might not get to call the game. And I said, I have a credential. Doesn't that work? And they said, nope. There's bogus credentials out there. There's fake tickets. At some point, they're going to close the gates. So if you want to broadcast the game, you show up 5 hours earlier. So those are the things that I remember more than I remember the game itself. The goal came from out of nowhere from Caligiuri, and it was the only goal of the game. But that's what I remember the most, is the atmosphere around Trinidad and the fact that we had 2 rows of U.S. fans there. And I'm pretty sure they all worked for U.S. Soccer. We didn't have American Outlaws or supporters groups back then. So it was really all of Trinidad and Tobago versus 2 rows of the USA.
Yeah. One more moment of history. 10 years later, a World Cup final. Stadium is packed in Pasadena, and Brandi Chastain makes one of the great moves in the history of world soccer. You were there for that match as well. What are your memories of that?
Yeah, that I have many more memories of the game itself than I did of Trinidad. Obviously, I remember the Chastain goal and the setup for it, but also the Christine Lilly save, Michelle Akers' injury, the heat of that day, and the fact that it was like and you don't often hear this in the women's game, it was like a heavyweight prize fight. The U.S. would throw a punch and China would counter punch, and there would be a brief knockdown and the other side would get up. We had no goals. Brandi Chastain wins it on that penalty kick. Who knows, how long it would have been before somebody scored in that game. It was a tight defensive battle. It was very physical. Michelle Akers can certainly attest to that. It was as if time stood still, though, John. I don't remember how long we laid out for, but after I said goal and we showed the pictures of what it looked like in the stadium, it was as if time had stood still. You were looking. Somebody said, "What were you doing during that time?" And I said, "I was a fan. I was watching. I was watching everybody celebrate. I was watching what it meant to everybody." But even as big an event as that was, I did not know at that time that decades later, we're still talking about that, because John, you've got a broadcasting resume. That when you're doing a game, you're pretty much in the moment. You're not thinking how big this is at the time, right? And when the game ends, you get somewhat of a sense of how big it was. The days that follow, when people are still talking about it, you get a sense, but you don't think at that point that decades later people are still going to be talking about it, right? Because you're in the moment. You're just calling the game. You don't have that sense. It's big, but you really don't know how big it is.
We'll have more with JP coming up in just a minute. Did you know when you join Soccer America, you get the daily Soccer on TV schedule delivered to your inbox every morning? It's something I've been relying on for a long time, decades, to keep track of matches from around the world. Also, you get expert analysis, insider interviews, in-depth coverage of the biggest games. Try it for free for 30 days. Go to socceramerica.com/free trial. That's socceramerica.com/free trial. And while you're here, click on the links in the description to sign up for notifications when our new episodes drop. JP Dellacamera has done a whole bunch, in the thousands of games on television in American soccer. He's with us on the Soccer Media Podcast. And you have done all those World Cups, and now you see a lot of the great American women players, players from around the world in the NWSL. How many different networks are you doing games on?
For NWSL, it's usually Ion. That's a regular gig every Saturday. First game of a doubleheader. And then other games that I do would either be on Paramount Plus or NWSL Plus. It's a great league. Great people to work for. I think it's the best women's soccer league in the world.
And does the rest of the world think that too?
You'll get an argument sometimes, probably from England, where they're spending a lot more money these days. But I would say there's good teams everywhere. The English league is good. French league is good. They're trying to make it better in Spain and in Mexico and in other places. Canada just started a league. But I think right now, NWSL, I would say, is number one.
And all of those leagues, including the European leagues, are trying to get some American players and have had some success getting American players and paying them pretty well, huh?
Yes. So Alyssa Thompson was most recently sent over to Chelsea, transferred over there. Naomi Girma has been there. Lindsay Horan, now Heaps, has been there. So we have a lot of players that are playing over there. Some are getting regular playing time and some are not. I know Crystal Dunn's over there, but she's not been playing as much. Hopefully she gets to play so that she can come back on the U.S. women's national team. But it works both ways, just like it has in MLS with you sell players over there, they sell players over here. That's the business of soccer.
Yeah, it's great. You are the lead voice of Fox Women's World Cup action. What is the state of American women's soccer? We've heard so much about the men and getting ready for the World Cup in 26 and Pochettino and how's he handling and all of these things. It's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
The women are quietly existing, aren't they?
The women have set the bar amazingly high, and it's getting even higher, I think, with Emma Hayes now taking over, and the fact that Emma's is giving a lot of other people an opportunity to play. She heavily scouts NWSL. You can tell by some of the recent call-ups that they've had that if you're doing well in NWSL, Emma sees you, she'll bring you in. They're also now training with under 23s and sometimes the under 20s, getting them in these big groups so that even though she's coaching the senior team, she can get to watch under 23s and some other age groups. When you look at our U.S. women's national team, there is depth at every position. The only question mark when you compare them to the men have several question marks, but on the women's side, the only question mark, and it may not even be one now, is who's the number one goalkeeper. With Alyssa Nair retiring, Fallon Tullis-Joyce seems like the heir apparent right now, but we still have several games to play and a long time to go. And also who's going to be the backups. Lately, it's been Claudia Dickey and Mandy McGlynn that's been called up, but there's depth everywhere. And even when you have injuries like a Trinity Rodman or pregnancies like a Mallory Swanson and a Sophia Wilson, there's so many young players that are coming up through this system that the hardest job is going to be who makes it. We have players, John, on this squad. I'll give you one as an example. Jordan Bugg plays regular for Seattle. She's eligible for the under 20s. That's how young she is. She's eligible for the under 23s, and she's getting called up by Emma Hayes for the senior team. So she's so good at a young age that she can play on the senior team, but she's age eligible for two younger groups. And you can say that about other players too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great group.
Marcelo Balboa, who, by the way, said that JP Dellacamera is the guy who suggested he get into the broadcasting business after when he retired, said that the men have immense pressure on them and they need to do something special in 2026. Now, what that means is quarterfinal or semifinal or someplace beyond. The U.S. men were in the quarterfinals in 2002 and have never been beyond that. But the women have this kind of pressure every single time. They're the four-time champions, the four-time Olympic champions. They are the
they're the favorites.
They're the favorites every single year, right?
You can say it.
Do they feel that? I mean, do they feel that immense pressure, do you think?
I don't know. Individually, it's probably different. You know, I've talked to some players recently where they say the phrase they're using now is pressure is a privilege, you know, which to me seems like it belongs on a T-shirt somewhere. So I don't know how they feel about it, but there's always a target on their backs, right? I mean, that's why it was such a failure in 2023. You know, that was their worst finish ever, right? And they didn't play well, let's face that. But even if they had played well and they had lost and had been eliminated early, they would have still been criticized, because if you play on the U.S. women's national team, you are expecting to win it all. If you play on the men's side, that's not the case. But what is successful, John, for the U.S. men? Like what is successful? Like, to me, I always think they're going to get out of their group. Always, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if they get out of their group, that's step one. Now, who do they play next? Who's their next opponent when you get to the knockout stage? That tells you all you need to know. I thought they would get out of their group in Qatar, and they did. When I saw the matchup was against the Netherlands, I wasn't feeling it. I didn't think they had a chance to beat the Netherlands. The Dutch were on this incredible unbeaten run. Louis van Gaal was in charge of their team. They had several outstanding players, and the result was expected. So if you say that you were disappointed at their World Cup in 2022, that can be your take or somebody else's take. To me, they finished where I thought they would. And I would say the same about 2026. They will get out of their group. I'll say that, not knowing who's in their group, but that's the ultimate, right? You have to get out of the group. And then it depends on who they play next. Who's the team? If they didn't play the Netherlands in 2022, if they had somebody else, they could have beaten them. They could have gone farther. And then you never know. Once you get that first knockout game out of the way and you start to advance and you're confident in your goalkeeper, who knows? But nobody's picking, that I've seen, the U.S. to win the 2026 World Cup. But they are expecting them to go deep. How deep? I guess we'll find out.
What do you think the average sports fan, and I mean somebody who doesn't watch soccer regularly, but hears about it? They know the World Cup's coming to the US, and maybe they don't even know it's coming to Mexico and Canada as well, but they know it's going to be here in the big stadiums, the football, the NFL stadiums. It's a really big deal, and Americans do really big deals really well. But does the average sports fan think, hey, we should win. We should do great. What do you think they think?
The average sports fan might think, well, we have home field advantage, right? But in some games, we don't have home field advantage. When the U.S. plays Mexico, we don't have home field advantage in this country. And we're finding out more and more against some of these other countries where you'd think, how do we not have home field advantage? We don't, right? But at a World Cup, it's different because I can remember back in 1994, I don't remember us being underdogs in terms of the stadiums. You know, people will find their way to get tickets. And also we'll say this, with the pricing of the tickets, it's going to go to some big time people, I would say, who will maybe expect something. I mean, it's like a Super Bowl crowd, right? Because the average fan doesn't go to a Super Bowl. I've never been to a Super Bowl. I was offered tickets once, couldn't go, but I mean, those are really big corporate dollars that go for those tickets, right? And you saw some of the prices that are out there now, and they're not going to go down. If anything, they're going to go up.
Right.
And so you don't know what that audience is going to be made up of. And especially now, if you're buying tickets, you don't even know what the matchup is, right?
No.
If you're going to watch, name a team, Ecuador play, Colombia play, Uruguay play. Where are they playing? Right?
You don't know.
Good luck. Good luck. Save your
go.
money, but also take your best guess. I mean, we'll know more when the draw comes out, but how many tickets will be sold by the time we see the draw?
Yeah, and how expensive they'll be even on the secondary market or the tertiary market, if there is one of those. Hey, let's talk about Major Arena Soccer League. You are heavily involved in this effort in America. And if anybody's ever seen indoor soccer, arena soccer, it is like human pinball. It is very fast. It is a thrilling game. How did you get involved in that, and what's that all about?
Going back a few years, it's probably like 5 years now. I ran into Keith Tozer, who was a longtime friend of mine. I ran into him at a coaches convention, I want to say in Chicago. And I've always been friends with Shep Messing. And somehow the conversation came to the MASL is looking for a commissioner. Do you want it? Who wants it? Who wants to apply for it? And the three of us said, I don't want to be commissioner, but why don't we, all three of us, apply for it as one and see what happens? It wasn't my idea. It was either Shep's or Keith's, but one of them said, let's apply as a trio. And I thought, okay, that will draw some interest. I think we got like an email back at some point that said, thanks for your interest, but we're going in this direction. And the only thing that bothered me about that, John, was that they didn't even ask us how it would work. Like, that's all I wanted, was like an interview, right? So that we could share our knowledge of indoor soccer and how we saw it in this country and where we thought the growth would be. And nobody was even interested to ask us how we would do this. It was a novel approach to have three people apply for one job. A few weeks later, we got a phone call out of the blue from one of the owners, and conversations started, and it went from there. I'm cutting out a lot of the middle parts, but I think we had 3 interviews, and then they brought us on. I think it was a 3-year contract, and then a couple of 1 years after that. And we're trying to grow it. I think you were probably a part of it, maybe in the NASL days, right? The Quakes had some indoor teams, right?
They did. Yeah, they did. I did a few games with the great John Miller, the baseball announcer.
Yeah,
we did some games on television back in the, it must have been the 80s.
That's right. John was the soccer guy before, I think maybe even before he was a baseball guy, not sure, but he was a well-known soccer commentator.
Yes.
But indoor soccer back then, John, was amazing. It's amazing today, but it was more amazing back then because we didn't have outdoor soccer like we have it today.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the best players that came over here, you know, the Steve Jungles of the world, the Stan Terleckis, the Julie V's, Kaz Dana. I mean, there's so many names that if it was today, they'd be playing in MLS. But back then, there was no MLS. So their careers were indoor, and they helped grow the game. And at one point, John, the game of the week in soccer in this country was the major indoor soccer league. It was not outdoor, right? So if you were on that MISL package, that was the package that people were watching, because we had no real outdoor soccer. Once the NASL folded, it was just the MISL. So when they write the history of soccer in this country, there has to be a chapter on indoor, because for one period of time, that's all we had. And at one point, the St. Louis Steamers outdrew every indoor sports league in America, including the NBA and the NHL.
Yeah. And of course, St. Louis has been a great soccer town in America for, I don't know, a century. Maybe?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. But if you look at MASL and you recognize some of the names, the Baltimore Blast goes back, Kansas City Comets, Tacoma Stars, San Diego Sockers. I mean, these are names that you have either reborn or have never gone away, right?
Yep.
You have what, nine teams?
We're at 8 this year, but
Okay.
there'll be expansion next year. We're already talking to groups. For various reasons, we cut from 12 to 8. Right now, it's more manageable. I think for this year anyway, we'll be better structured to make these advances. I think in terms of attendance, in terms of streaming, in terms of marketing, getting sponsors out there. One of our owners is in Monaco at Sportel, you know, trying to sell our league. So
Great.
We've made baby steps, you know, along the way. One year we had our games on Sirius XM radio. The last few years we've had games on the Galazzo Sports Network. So I think we've come a long way from when our trio took over 5-6 years ago.
And the three of you still get along just fine?
Famously, yeah.
Yeah. And where do the players come from? Who are the people who populate the teams?
The players are from all over the world, actually. I don't have the breakdown off the top of my head in terms of the number of countries that they come from, but Marco Fabian is one of our more famous players. Played for the Mexican national team, played in MLS with Philadelphia Union, played all over the world. We have other players that are like that. We also have some young, talented American players like a Zach Reggett. Zoltan Toth's son, Chris Toth, has played for our national teams, beach soccer, and other forms of indoor soccer, futsal. And I think one of the best compliments that we have is at the TST tournament, there were well over 100 of our players playing in that tournament, some on the winning team, some scored the game-winning goals. The best players from TST have come from our league.
Great. One final thought here, and that is that probably never before have there been more young, I can say this, never before have there been more young people interested in broadcasting soccer. The pool is deep and wide of young people who would like to make a career out of this. I know you know that, but I also know that you try to mentor young people as well. And and how do you do that, and why do you think that's important?
Well, the future is in the youth, right? In whatever we do, right? And especially in broadcasting. And I think the good news is that there's so many more jobs open, John, today than when you and I first started. There's more teams, there's more leagues. We didn't have women's soccer back then either in terms of a professional league, right? Now you've got 2 professional leagues on the women's side in this country and several on the amateur side, and everybody's streaming. And then you've got all of these outdoor leagues that are out there and indoor soccer. So the good news is there's so much more opportunity. The bad news is that there's so many people that also want to do it, right? So you're competing against a lot of young and talented people. I work every weekend at NEP Vista in Florida, and that has been a great training ground for a lot of young announcers that you're seeing today, whether it's on the NWSL or on some of the Fox games for MLS and USL. That's proven to be a great experience for a lot of these young voices that I think are very good and will make big names for themselves in the future. Some of them, and some of them the rest of the world will find out in the World Cups ahead, right? It is going to be a young person's game. And who knows, John, with AI, what's going to happen to the broadcasting world. I heard a commercial one day, and I said to the guy that did it, I said, I know voices. And I said, that guy's voice is great, but I can't pinpoint who it is. And he says it was AI. And so I'm starting to think, is AI the future? I mean, are they gonna do all the voiceovers? Could they broadcast the game in the future with AI? Who knows?
They could. It's not there yet, but they still need voices. They still need
Yes.
something that generates. It's generative still. It has to be. It has to come from somewhere. But I don't know. Hopefully,
encourage the young people though to stay with it.
Right.
Follow their dream. There are opportunities, and even if it's not a well-paying thing at first, because all of these amateur leagues are streaming too, right? There's a way to get experience if you can hang in there, and then there's also a way to get to the top.
Yeah, it's like we did years ago. You start out, not make a whole lot of money, do lots of games, and you'll find out whether you like it, and you'll find out if you're any good at it, and see if somebody will pay you a little bit more tomorrow than they paid you yesterday, right?
Correct. That's the formula. You got it.
It is. JP, it's always a great pleasure to chat with you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Always great to talk to you, John.
JP Dellacamera will do World Cup number 18 when it rolls around in North America in less than 1 year. And he's been with us on Soccer Media Podcast. I'm John Shrader. Thanks again to JP for all that time he spent with us. We really do appreciate it. Before we wrap it up, if you're looking to stay on top of the game, check out Soccer America. Members get the daily soccer on TV schedule and a daily digest of the top soccer stories in their inbox every morning, plus coverage of the biggest matches. You can try it for free at socceramerica.com/free trial. That's socceramerica.com/free trial. And while you're there, click like and subscribe and check the links and get the description, get notified when our new episodes drop.
The question for today's Soccer America trivia was, name the two players who tied for leading the USA in scoring during the qualifying campaign for the 1990 World Cup. The answer, Hugo Perez and Frank Klopas. Each scored a team-leading 2 goals. Klopas scored twice and Perez once in a 5-1 win over Jamaica and St. Louis. Perez scored the winner in a crucial 1-0 victory on the road over El Salvador. Neither Perez or Klopas ended up on Bob Gansler's 90 World Cup roster. The USA lost to Czechoslovakia, Italy, and Austria at the 90 World Cup.
I'm John Shrader for Mike Waitala. We'll see you next time around on the Soccer Media Podcast.